Well, you know, there's Hebrew and then there's rabbinic Hebrew.
Yeah.
Because the technical terms, it's like when people, it's so funny when I talk to kids or even adults, and they say, "Oh, it must be so easy being Israeli." Because if you're Israeli, you speak Hebrew, so you can read the prayers and you can read the Torah and you can read the Mishnah. And it's like, yeah, and you're an English speaker, you can read Shakespeare, you can read Beowulf, you can read American law journals. It's special vocabularies and special poetic styles that it's not, yeah, it's easier, obviously, you know, for me to read Shakespeare than someone who doesn't speak English. But just because you speak English doesn't mean you understand Shakespeare.
I remember that when I was studying university, and few friends, they were studying law.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one of them, okay, that was Orthodox.
Ah.
And everyone at the time, because they learn all kind of law in Israel,
Right.
but there's only one part that is related with the tradition. And everyone wanted to be friend of a real Orthodox person because they were Israelis,
right.
But they didn't know, they didn't understand. It was difficult to understand.
Yeah.
So they need someone with a strong background of law.
And you'll see when we decide which bava to do for the next section, even though it's talking about law in quite clear terms, they're technical terms. And you have to learn what does a tooth mean when talking about damages. That's the way it is. Tooth, fire, is it what? All right, but let's finish Sanhedrin. Let's see if we can't push through because we are nearing the end. I believe that we were on 10.6. That meets,
Four.
what?
I thought
10.4?
Yes.
No, really?
Yes.
We didn't do the city?
No, 10-4.
Okay, 10.4, big buddy. Get it? 10.4? It's 10, the old CB call? All right, never mind. Sanhedrin 10.4. Let's see if we can't deal with this city that has been seduced into idol worship. Need a volunteer? Someone's got to read so I can interrupt. Steve?
The inhabitants of a city seduced into worshiping idols have no portion in the world to come. As it says, certain men, wicked persons, have gone out from among you and seduced the inhabitants of their town.
All right, so this is our linkage from the section that we had been doing about who has and who doesn't have a portion in the world to come. And now we're going from now portion of the world to come into the laws of a city that has become fully idolatrous. All right, so now we have to do a little bit of the laws about the city of idolaters.
Now, what is the definition of a city that become to be completely? Because I'm pretty sure, I don't want to sound Abraham, I'm pretty sure there are some tzaddikim there or some righteous people. What does mean a city that become completely? Like, is that
Let's read the Mishnah.
9% of the population?
Let's read the Mishnah.
Oh, okay.
Those questions come up.
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
Exactly. There are also teachers there.
Las Vegas was never not idolatrous, so it hasn't been seduced.
Okay.
That is actually an important distinction. We are talking about an Israelite city here. We're not just saying any city that has a bunch of idolaters in it has this penalty. This is a city that was Israelite, that somebody came in and began to preach this gospel of idolatry and seduce the city towards it. This is how you handle it. I should point out that in the Talmud, there was an argument that this never happened. Not the seduction necessarily, but the destruction that we're about to read about. That there was no real case of this taking place. Some rabbis said yes, but a lot of the others said no.
When they talk about apostate talk, maybe it's there in the continuation.
Mhm.
I don't know. Okay.
That's okay. If you get the question out now, then we'll know if
Okay.
when we answer it.
It's also related, for example, at the time of the Mishnah, like when the Christianity expanded and some communities, some cities in Israel,
Mhm.
like in the Galilee,
Right.
they convert to Christianity.
Well, certainly the basic idea,
That's going to be like this.
right? Well, the basic idea predates that. I mean, because the idea is talked about in Deuteronomy, actually, in the section that we just read. So that's 1,000 years before Christianity is invented. So the idea that there would be cities that were flipping as a possibility is a very old idea. And city religions, maybe we should just do a quick little anthropology thing. The idea of a city having a religion that was part of the whole city culture is not weird. Anyone ever hear of the city Athens?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah. What was the main god of Athens? Athena. Athens, Athena. That's kind of the name. So having cities that were particularly aligned to a particular god was normal, and having the city god was normal. And so to say, hey, our city needs its own new god. We need, we're going to have this god, that god. Let's build an idol, and everybody's going to do it. It isn't necessarily knocking on every door saying, have you heard how good Marduk is? Right? It's not that kind of seducing. It is convincing the whole city to become under one of these gods.
So it's more what happened with the 10 tribes in Israel, the north tribe, that they become, some of them, they move to a different religion.
Right. Well, they actually moved to a very blended religion. They still kind of believed in God, and they also believed in the idols. And that was kind of what Elijah's big problem was. He's like, guys, quit hopping from one foot to the other. If God is God, worship God. If these other gods are gods, worship them. Quit blending and mixing it up. Pick. And the people still didn't really do a good job of that. All right, onward.
They are not executed unless the seducers are of that city and that tribe, and until the majority of the city are seduced, and the seducers are men. All
right, so the rabbis again are narrowly construing the verse from the Torah in its most literal sense. And again, this is in order to reduce the number of cases where this might be considered applicable, to match only precisely the language of the Torah, which is plural, which is that it's been seduced from the city, right? And that it is gone among you to seduce. So therefore, it's got to be men, it's got to be people, and you have to have the majority of the city buying into it. Make sense? I mean, you understand the idea? Good. Let's go a little bit more.
If women or minors seduced it, or if a minority of the city were seduced, or if the seducers were from outside the city, they are treated as individuals, and therefore 2 witnesses and a formal warning are necessary for each offender.
All right, so this is the big distinction, right? Because remember, we've been talking about for 10 chapters, the whole idea that if there's a crime, you need 2 witnesses, you need the warning, you need the whole structure before anyone can be executed. And the rabbis are now dealing with a case where the Torah seems to be describing just wiping out a city. Well, did you go and warn each and every person? No, you couldn't. Did you witness each and every person bowing to these idols? No, you didn't. So the rabbis are, rightly, I believe, trying to find the framework in which this works. So they say it has to be exactly as the Torah described, the majority of the city that's involved, and if not, then we just deal with it like we deal with normal idolatry, which is Bob over here is committing idolatry, we deal with Bob. Sally over there is committing idolatry, we deal with Sally, not Orlando as a whole unit. Make sense? Onward?
In this, the penalty of individuals is severer than that of the multitudes, for individuals are stoned, therefore their property is saved, but the multitudes are decapitated, hence their possessions are destroyed.
Right, so there is this trade-off between how you get killed and what happens to your possessions. So the penalty for being part of the seduced city is less severe. You're still dying, but it is a less severe form of execution. But the aftermath is more severe because all the property is destroyed, as opposed to individual one-on-one idolaters who are stoned, which is a more severe form of execution, but whose property goes to their heirs and is not destroyed after their execution. Well, the idol is, but everything else is fine. Okay? Okay. Onward. 10:5.
Shall surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword. A company of donkey drivers or camel drivers passing from place to place saves the city.
Okay.
Huh?
Huh? Huh? Okay. So, math time. Who counts as the residents and who counts as the seduced and who is part then of the total. So let me give you, okay, this is probably gonna, I'm not great at math, but I'll use small numbers, and Natan, you can correct me when I'm wrong. Okay, so we have 10 people who normally live in the city, right? 6 of them are now seduced to idolatry. The majority of the city, right? 6 is more than half of 10. Yes, good. So the city should be wiped out. However, you have 6 people in the city who have been seduced, but there are 3 visiting camel drivers. There's a caravan that stopped by this week. Okay? Now, they're not residents. They're just staying overnight. But 6 is not more than half of 13. Therefore, the city is not destroyed. So they are counted for the purposes of the total population, but they are not part of the seduced because they're not residents of the city. So they have saved the city.
So what if you go in the other direction? You have 10 people in the city, 6 are not seduced, only 4. Okay, but came 3 visitors that they are sinners. So now they become the majority.
But they are not residents of the city.
So for really? No.
Yes,
Okay.
but they're not residents.
Both ways.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Because who is the determining for being responsible for the city as having been a majority, right? Who do we count? These are the idol worshipers, right?
Yeah.
But from whom do we count? We count from the people that are there. So they need to be the residents. But this number is anybody who's in the area. And this number is going to be affected by being wiped out depending upon the majority. So by all means, they should be able to save the city because they're not responsible for the behavior of the local inhabitants. On the other hand, as you were describing, someone showing up, they're not part of the city's corruption. They're just traveling through. So it may increase the total amount of idol worshipers, but that doesn't mean the rest of the city should suffer just because these guys showed up on the doorstep. Now, if they take up residence and become resident, then yeah, we got a problem. But the fact that visitors can save, but visitors can't condemn, makes sense. No, does to me. Onward.
Doom it and all that is in it. From here they said that the property of the righteous, which is within the city, is destroyed, but that which is outside of the city is saved, while that of the wicked, whether in or outside the city, is destroyed.
Okay, so obviously if you're a righteous person, you probably should have left the city, and you probably would leave the city. But now we got a problem. All right, we've got walled city. Right, this is looking down on the Google map view of the city. And you've got wicked people living here, and the wicked person has a farm out there. And then you have righteous person here, and the righteous person has a farm out there, right? Righteous person says, this city is handbasket, heading the wrong direction. So he leaves, but he still has a house in the city. Right? He hasn't found a good real estate agent to sell it for him. Or maybe the wicked people don't want to give him a good price because they're wicked. And he's got a farm outside the city. So maybe he moved out to his farm rather than staying there. And the wicked guy, he's this wicked, he's happy now the city's bad. The city gets destroyed. The wicked person's property is doom it, meaning the stuff that he owns here or there gets wiped out. Even though it's the city that's the target, because he is wicked, he is part of the it that is doomed. The righteous guy, well, doom it, meaning the city, his stuff gets wiped out, but his stuff that's outside the border of the walls doesn't, because that's not it as well. It's outside that the law of destruction.
Who is destroying? Human or God?
Human.
Human. Okay, it's human law.
Human law. It's meant to be implemented by the court.
But the righteous guy has to move out, otherwise he's decapitated.
If he's there at the point of the sentence being handed down, then yeah, there's a problem. Good? 10:6. Now we're back to where I thought we were.
And you shall gather all its spoil into the public square. If it had no public square, one is made for it. If the public square was outside of the city, it is brought within it.
All right, again, we're being literal for the Torah. The Torah says everything's gathered into the public square. We're going to gather everything into the public square. If they don't have one, we'll build one. We're going to destroy it in a couple minutes, but we'll build one anyway because we are not doing this out of revenge, out of anger. We are doing this in order to fulfill the Torah. And the Torah says square, you get a square. And even if your square used to be outside the walls, we're going to make one inside the walls, put all the stuff in it, and then destroy it. Because, again, we're not doing this because we're angry. We're doing this just to fulfill the mitzvah. Onward.
And you shall burn with fire the city, and all its spoil as a whole burnt offering for the Lord your God. And all its spoil, but not the spoil of heaven. From here they said the holy objects in the city must be redeemed, and the heave offerings allowed to rot, and the second tithe and the sacred writings hid.
All right, so here's the tricky. Its spoil means that it belongs to the people in the city, their loot, their stuff. Heaven's spoil means things that have been dedicated for the temple, or that are tithes, or that are sacred writings. So you come into the city to take care of this law. You grab everybody's desks and chairs and all of that and everything else in the city, and you're piling it up. But someone has a Torah. Well, the Torah doesn't belong to the wicked. The Torah belongs to heaven. So you can't throw the Torah on the pile. On the other hand, you can't use it. Someone has a cow that has a label hanging off of it that says, this cow is going to go to the temple next week, right? Because like I said, they weren't all just only idolaters. Sometimes they did both at the same time. So the cow has been dedicated to the temple. Well, it doesn't belong to the city anymore. It belongs to God, but I can't use it. So what do? This gives us the explanation. Things that have been dedicated can be redeemed, and then whatever you redeemed and purchased with the redemption can go into the pile so that the value is lost. And the holy objects and other tithes and stuff that can be used should just be hidden, and other things that can just rot, you just let them rot. I didn't hurt them. I didn't help them. I just let them go bad. So there's a special way to handle things that don't really belong to the city anymore. They belong to God. But they're still going to go bye-bye, and no one's going to get any good use out of it. Now, why are we destroying all the property of the city? I mean, apart from the fact that the Torah says to. Why would the Torah tell us to destroy all that stuff?
I see like it's like a sickness when someone have
Leprosy
or something like that. That in order to stop the sickness that will expand around other people or other regions, you destroy everything. So you concentrate and you eliminate in one place the problem.
So it's quarantine.
Quarantine.
You need to burn it all to make sure that the virus doesn't spread.
Exactly.
You are such a good man. And you're missing the point for most of the ancient world.
Okay.
Right? The guys over the hill, they got a lot of pretty cows. They got a lot of gold. If we can get a rumor going that they're idolaters, we can go smash their city and take their stuff. In fact, this was precisely done by Ahab. Ahav and Jezebel, the later king and queen of the northern kingdom of Israel. He wanted to have a vineyard of Navot, and the guy didn't want to sell. And so what did he do? He got a whole bunch of people to lie and say, he cursed God. And they executed him, and then they took his vineyard. Right? That is the ploy. By destroying everything in the city, you remove the conflict of interest so that people are not going to start these rumors just to go raid and get their stuff. So Natan, it's a beautiful idea of quarantine, but this is to stop people from being greedy.
I came too late.
Yeah.
A few thousand years later.
If you've been born a long time ago, you would have been a much meaner person, and then you'd understand, hey, we got an opportunity to rob them, and we can say we're doing it for God. And there are plenty of people who try to do that even to this day. So it's not surprising that human nature hasn't changed so much. And the idea that everything gets wiped out is not just about a spiritual quarantine, but it's about preventing the false accusations and the use of this commandment to attack another city and take their stuff. Because now you know, if we destroy the city, we don't get a penny from it. Well, the only reason you would do it then is because it was an actual real situation. Because what other benefit am I getting from this? Onward.
A whole burnt offering for the Lord your God, Rabbi Shimon said, the holy blessed one declared, if you execute judgment upon the seduced city, I will ascribe merit to you as though you had sacrificed to me a whole offering.
Right. So why call it an offering when we burn all of their stuff? That's not the usual form of an offering. That's not what we put on the altar. You don't just pile up furniture on an altar. Why? Because doing this, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's as good as bringing a sacrifice to the altar. So it's a type of offering without it being a literal offering. Onward.
And it shall remain an everlasting ruin, never to be rebuilt. It may not be made even into gardens and orchards, according to the words of Rabbi Yosef of Galilee.
Go ahead and read part A.
Rabbi Akiva says, never to be rebuilt. It may not be built as it was, but it may be made into gardens and orchards.
All right, so what are they arguing about here? We've destroyed the city, now what? And Rabbi Yossi says, it says don't rebuild. That means you leave it rubble and unused land forever. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, it says don't rebuild it. So I can't rebuild it, but I can build something else on top of it, or plant an orchard, or make it into a garden, or I can use the land. I just can't make it into a city again. Make sense? They both are trying to fulfill that don't rebuild it clause. Onward.
But nothing that has been doomed stick to your hand, in order that the Lord may turn his blazing anger and show you compassion. As long as the wicked exist in the world, there is blazing anger in the world. Then when the wicked perish from the world, blazing anger disappears from the world.
So there's an idea that's exemplified in the story in Joshua, where one of the soldiers takes loot from a city that God has said very clearly, we're not taking loot from this city. He takes it, he hides it, and bad stuff starts happening. And that's what the idea here is that if you think you're going to profit by looting the city, think again. If you think, well, hey, I'm doing what God wants by wiping out the city, and I found this little pouch of gold, I don't think God would really be unhappy if I got the gold. Yeah, God would. That you should not be doing this to profit to yourself. That is going to only perpetuate the strife in the world that's coming about from this. So that power of self-justification, you've got to rein it in.
Okay, now my question is, when that area of Israel got, torn down, the city got torn down, is it allowed to be rebuilt today? I mean, is there cities upon that city today?
Well, we have no idea where they were. So there aren't little flags that say this is where this happened. And like I said in the Talmud, there was a debate and discussion, and many of the rabbis said this never actually took place. There was one rabbi who said, yeah, there was, and I stood on its ruins. But generally, the other rabbi said, no, this never was put into practice, that this was a law that was in potentia, that it was a potential option, but it was never actually used. Think of it like it's funny, what we talked about a little bit earlier, it's like the American nuclear arsenal, right? We've got it, and we never use it. And God willing, we'll never use it. We have the capacity to wipe things out, but that doesn't mean we have wiped things out.
We used
twice. We used twice
That's true. In Germany.
Japan. Now we did destroy Germany in other ways, but we destroyed other parts of Japan in other ways, but we did use 2 nuclear weapons in Japan. But since then, in fact, no country that has nuclear weapons has used them in war. They exist. They're on the books. They are certainly options, but they have not been used. And this nuclear option, according to the rabbis in the Talmud, except for one, was never used. But they still had to know the law. They still had to know what was involved.
Well, everybody's worried that Iran is not going to follow the rules of not using their nuclear
whole nother topic outside of the Mishnah. Yeah, the Iranian situation and many of the other situations in the world are a whole nother class.
Rabbi,
Chapter 11, yes.
what happened with this argument between Yosei and Akiva? Who won?
I can't remember from the Bavli who ends up winning. Like I said, this is an argument more in theory than practice. So oftentimes when that happens, we don't have to come to a firm conclusion. But generally speaking, Akiva wins. As on the average, Akiva usually wins in his arguments. All right, final chapter. Let's get strangled.
Here, the halacha follows the view of Rabbi Akiva.
Yay! That's one of the nice things about the art school commentary is that it'll often bring in the conclusion from the Gemara to, if you want to know what the final score was.
Thank you. I can sleep now.
But you want to buy the competition.
There's no competition in learning. It's all good. All right, chapter 11, Mishnah 1.
Following a strangle, one who strikes his father or mother, one who kidnaps a Jew, an elder who rebels against the ruling of the court, a false prophet, one who prophesies in the name of an idol, one who commits adultery, witnesses who testified falsely to the adultery of a priest's daughter, and one who has had sexual relations with her.
Okay, so all of these categories we are going to talk about as each turn. So if you have a question about G, wait. We're going to go through each one of them in the Mishnah.
No, sorry, that before moving there, we never saw what is the majority of the city, the definition.
No, majority.
But majority.
Majority. Yeah, that was my math. Remember my advanced math?
I know, but really simple majority.
Simple majority.
Plus one.
If they were seduced and if the city has gone, exactly, yeah. Man from local resident, all those things. If all those other conditions were met and it was a majority, then yes. Okay, so now we're going to go through one by one these different topics for people who are strangled. Remember, strangulation was generally considered to be the least bad way to die. Okay, part 2. Every parent in the room can wonder about this one.
The one who strikes his father or his mother is liable only if he wounds them.
Right, so what is this ruling out? You give your dad a shove, you're not actually liable for this. Doesn't mean it's a recommended behavior for a good son or daughter, but it does mean you don't get executed. Remember, again, we are also talking in all of these cases with witnesses and warnings, but you have to make a wound before it triggers this capital offense.
But isn't wound like punch?
A punch is not a wound. It's what happens when the punch lands. Right? So I can slap someone and leave no wound, and I can slap someone and knock a tooth out. The knocking the tooth out is a wound.
Yeah.
The slap that leaves no mark or no trauma is, again, not something that a person should ever be doing, but is not something that would get you executed either.
But it says here, the one who strikes his father or mother is liable only if he wounds them.
Right.
But when you're striking, it's not so much of pushing, it's more of an argument of a 50-50. But if
Right.
I went and
I didn't want you.
Right. So that's what the rabbis are trying to clarify. If you were to say striking is punishable by death, then the first thing that's going to happen is some kid is going to, get angry one night and just go, "Oh, Dad," and give him a good hard shove. Okay, do we kill him or not?
no,
If I go, "Hi, Mom," is that considered a strike? And so the rabbis are saying we need a definition of strike on behalf of the Torah, and strike means wound. Anything less than a wound, you're not being executed. Again, you're not getting the Child of the Year award, but you're not being executed. Yes.
Going back, skimming through these, is there anywhere that it addresses all of the 10 Commandments? Some of these are in the 10 Commandments,
Mhm.
and but not all of them.
You mean in the Mishnah? or just in general?
Well,
Well, I mean, all the commandments, both in the 10 and the other 603 from the rest of the Torah, are covered in one spot or another. But there isn't a spot where it just goes through systematically and says this one, this one, this one,
okay.
in that particular order. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, especially because the Mishnah tends to categorize things by topic more than how they appear in the Torah. There are later commentators that went back and tried to take the Mishnah and other rabbinic writings and fit them to the order that the Torah talks about them, to make it easier to match. I'm reading the Torah, what's the law? I'm reading the Torah, what's the law? But the Mishnah, that wasn't its main job. All right, so part A.
In this respect, cursing is more stringent than striking. For one who curses his or her parents after death is liable, while one who strikes them after death is not.
All right, so cursing, which is also a death penalty, you might think, well, hey, cursing isn't as bad as hitting, but actually in this one particular way, it is, because you can curse your parents even after they're dead, and you are still responsible. That if people say, hey man, you better stop what you're saying about your mom, and you say, I don't care about that, and they say, if you don't stop, you're gonna get called in front of the court. We've got witnesses here, and he says, and lays in the curse about her. Even though she's dead, he can still be tried, as opposed to somebody who punches the body. It's just a horrible thought, but punches the body of one of their parents is not liable for the death penalty.
And I can understand why. It's because God did say in the Torah, life and death is in the power of your tongue. So you speak.
Right. And
your words are sharper than being physical. You can destroy some of the words.
Well, and you can't wound a body, but you can wound somebody's reputation. You can wound somebody's legacy by what you say.
And character.
Okay. Part 3.
One who kidnaps a Jew is not liable unless he brings him onto his own property. Rabbi Judah said, until he brings him onto his own property and puts him to service, as it says, if a man is found to have kidnapped a fellow Israelite, enslaving him or selling him. Okay, so Rabbi
Yehuda puts a little extra stringency on this. In general, the rabbis are saying you're not considered to be a kidnapper until you have actually taken the person into your official possession. And official possession, they're defining as being property. So you grab someone and you're pulling them down the street and they get free, you're not officially a kidnapper. You grab someone, you pull them into your house, now you're a kidnapper.
That doesn't make sense.
Why?
Because, you hear on the news parents getting caught dragging their kids, trying to snatch and disappear them. It's still considered kidnapping because it's attempt kidnap.
And I think that word you just added in your final sentence explains.
But
attempted.
It's still kidnapping.
No, you just said two different things. You said it's attempted kidnapping.
No, I'm saying what the news says.
Right, but the law does consider things different if it's an attempt versus success. Now, in American law, there are different standards. Because the American law did not consult Mishnah, nor did it necessarily need to consult Mishnah when it was coming up with its rulings. So we shouldn't always be surprised that American law has a different perspective on where to draw the line and how to handle punishments. But Jewish law is trying to, based off the idea here that you have enslaved him or sold him, that means you have taken him to own him. And the way you show ownership of property is by bringing it into your possession, and that means bringing them into your property. The rabbis are trying to interpret the Torah as clearly as the Torah was written. And if that's at variance from what modern American law is, then so be it.
Now, how strong is the end? Meaning, what happens if you do only one of the both? Or you only introduce in your property, but you don't use him. Like, for example, you put him in a jail.
Well, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is the second voice, right? The first one says you're not liable. The stama, the anonymous voice of the Mishnah, says kidnapping means you take him onto your property. Done. And put him in a cell, stick him in your attic,
Oh.
put him in your living room, that's kidnapping. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's not kidnapping until you start selling him or working him. That's kidnapping. So imprisoning someone against their will, says Rabbi Yehuda, is not eligible for the death penalty. Now, what Rabbi Yehuda is trying to do is say there's a difference between just taking someone and treating them like a slave. And it's the treating them like a slave that's the problem. And the other rabbis, the anonymous rabbis that put the first proposition, says no, taking someone at all, that is kidnapping. So that's where their debate is spinning. Two more special cases.
If he kidnaps his own son, Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yohanan ben Barucha, declares him liable.
That is to say, kidnapping your own kid is kidnapping. But
the sages exempt him.
Okay, the sages exempt him because the child technically has an obligation to serve the parent. So even though you're doing it against the child's will, they are obligated to serve you, and therefore they may not want to, but you have that authority. And that's what the debate is over in that one. Again, as we've seen on the case of the rebellious child and other places, it doesn't mean you're supposed to treat your kids like that. They're simply trying to figure out what triggers the death penalty, not what is a good course of behavior. Very, very important from this and many other parts of Jewish law. Just because you're not liable for the death penalty doesn't mean they go around handing out trophies. And
But wouldn't this cause, a life death penalty? Okay, now I just said so backwards, but okay. Wouldn't that
kidnapping your own child?
Kidnapping your own child, but like if the child ends up cursing the father.
Okay, so the repercussions could very easily cause all sorts of other problems, right? You curse them, they punch you and make a wound. Now they're liable. It's a big problem, right? So don't. So this is one of those cases where, yes, you're not liable for the death penalty should you do it, say the majority of the sages, but you shouldn't do it. And there are whole sections of Jewish law that are built around that principle, which is technically yes, but practically don't.
But wouldn't the life and death, like the curse would be technically the death penalty?
The child would be subject to execution, yes.
No, but it should be the father if he's snatching his son.
But it's the child that cursed their parents. That's the crime that the child. Now again, we're talking in this case, we'd be talking about an adult.
The father causing the child to curse, that it would be the father that is.
Judaism does not recognize one person as causing another to sin. There is a radical sense of self-responsibility. Judaism doesn't play the blame game, up to and including hiring someone for murder. Right? If I hire Natan to go out and kill someone, Natan is the one who is the murderer, not me. Again, I'm not getting any Hero of the Year awards, and I can be implicated on many other charges, but I am not a murderer. He is, because nobody forced him to go kill someone. Sorry, Natan. Right. And that radical notion of you are responsible for you, and you cannot just say, society made me do it. My horrible situation made me do it. My parents were mean to me, and that's why I did. No,
but
you are responsible.
Natan was threatened to, if he didn't kill that dog over there on that street, I'm gonna kill him.
Okay, so then when we are threatening a life as opposed to other forms of payment, then yes, you are not supposed to go murder someone else. Even in those cases, it is better to let yourself be killed than to kill another innocent, because the end result is the same, the death of an innocent, either you or them. But should you do it under those circumstances, the earthly court cannot judge you. The heavenly court, on the other hand, the heavenly court can. So you're right, there is a loophole. If I put a gun to someone's head and say, kill that person or I kill you, if they kill someone else, the court cannot convict them. But they are going to have a very long conversation with God.
It is backwards in this country because I say the reason why I say that is because if the person told that person go kill that person, that person that told that person gets more of a crime and more of
it depends on the state and the trial. But yes, the person would still be considered as involved in the murder in a way that is more direct than under Jewish law. All right, and then the last special case.
If he kidnapped one who was half a slave and half free, Rabbi Yehuda declares him liable, but the sage is exempt.
Okay. How are you a half a slave? So again, you cannot think about the pure chattel slavery system that we had in the US. We're thinking more here about indentured servitude, temporary servitude that was under Jewish law. And so you have one person that was owned by two people. They partnered. They said, look, neither one of us can afford a slave on our own, but we can both go to the market. We'll hire someone, buy someone, and they'll work for both of us. And you have your share of him, and I have my share of him. Well, after a while, if I say, you know what, I don't need this person's work anymore, it's better for him to be free, I free my side of the slave. He is now half a slave and half free. It's a very rare, but very possible condition.
In the explanation, I don't know if this is a typo or what, but next to the last line, it talks about half a Jew.
No, they're talking about half free. Because you can see, that according to the sages, since he is half a slave. I think what he may be trying to say, if it wasn't a typo, is there is a, if they're talking not about an indentured Jewish servant, there is a process by which somebody who wasn't Jewish who becomes a slave can be circumcised and become Jewish under the ownership of this master's house. When he is then freed, he is considered to have converted, and he is now Jewish. So in that sense, that may be what the commentary is referring to here, that he is half a free Jewish person, and he's also still half a slave.
They're right, but not half a Jew. Okay.
Right, so, but it's not half a Jew in the way that people talk about that colloquially nowadays.
Okay.
Sure. Right, so because he is still half a slave, the question then becomes, are you kidnapping the free part, or are you kidnapping the slave part? And the slave part is not, it's not exactly the same as kidnapping the free part. And that's what they are arguing about. And the sages say, no, the slave part is the dominant part. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the free part is the dominant part. And majority rules in these cases. So when you have a single opinion against the majority, you know the majority is the one that goes. Okay. We're not going to get through this tonight. All right. Let's go ahead and start. Let's see if we can do this in 5 minutes. You're going to have to leave? Okay. So we need a new volunteer to read for the rebellious elder.
I'll read it.
Okay, so we're 11:2. We're not going to be able to finish the whole topic, but we can start it tonight.
Okay. Do you want me to read Mishnah 2?
Mishnah 2, right.
Or
And
the introduction?
nope, just read from where it says Mishnah 2. We're going to get a long quote from the Torah.
Okay. An elder rebelling against the ruling of the court is strangled. For it says, if there arise a matter too hard for you for judgment, you shall promptly repair to the place that the Lord your God will have chosen, and appear before the Levitical priest or the
Magistrate?
Yeah, magistrate in charge at the time, and present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from the place that the Lord chose, and the ruling handed down to you. You must not. Did I skip? No,
you shall act.
Okay, I thought I observed it. I think I did. from the place that the Lord chose, observing
right? Scrupulously.
all of their instructions to you. You shall act in accordance with the instruction given to you, the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you, either in the right or to the left. Should a man act
Presumptuously
and disregard the priest charged with serving there the Lord your God, or the magistrate, that men shall die.
All right.
Deuteronomy 17, chapter 8, 13.
Right. So
Verse 8, 13.
that's the problem, right? You have a problem. You have a difficult case. You go to the higher court. The higher court says, yay, nay, left, right. This is what to do. This is what not to do. And you still go ahead and do the opposite of what they said. Right? They said go right, you go left. They said go up, you go down. That acting presumptuously leads to your execution. Now, what the sages have done here, when they go to interpret this, is say that special case of the man acting presumptuously, that isn't just any old person. That is somebody who has standing in the community. That's an elder. That's a rabbi, basically. That they are going against a higher court's ruling for the law. So let's go ahead and continue and find out what that means.
The three courts of law were there and situated at the entrance to the temple mount. Another at the door of the temple. Thus have I expounded
the temple court, and the third in the chamber of hewn stone.
Did I skip it?
Yeah, I skipped a couple lines. So the idea, there's three courts that are situated on the temple or in the temple precincts, and each one is considered a higher court. And actually, just in the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and read so I can give commentary as I go. So they, meaning the other group of sages, first went to the court, which is at the entrance of the Temple Mount. And he, the rebellious elder, stated, "Thus have I expounded, and thus have my colleagues expounded. Thus have I taught, and thus have my colleagues taught." So he goes to the court, and he says, "Hey, I was just teaching that on Shabbat, it's okay to have a bonfire. And they were teaching that on Shabbat, you can't have a bonfire. And that's what the situation is." Part B, if the first court had heard a ruling on the matter, they stated. So the first quarter goes, no, we all know you don't have bonfires on Shabbat. They say it, case is done. We'll get to the after effect in a minute, right? So if they know a ruling for whatever this topic of disagreement is on, then they give it. If they don't have a ruling about this, then they go to the second court, which is at the entrance to the temple court. And he declares, "Thus have I expounded, and thus have my colleagues expounded, thus have I taught, and thus have my colleagues taught." Same process. If the second court had heard a ruling, they state it. If not, they all go to the great court of the chamber of hewn stone, from whence instruction is issued to all Israel. For it says, "You shall carry out the verdict and announce to you from the place that the Lord chose." And that, of course, is the high court in Jerusalem. So we're following the process here. Something very important to note. The courts are only allowed, lower courts, to say that what he has said is wrong if they have heard a ruling contradictory to it. They can't just say it doesn't make sense. They have to have a tradition, a teaching, something that they know that contradicts what he's saying. Because he has that too, right? My rabbi taught me such and such. My teacher taught me this. And I'm just repeating what my teacher taught. They have to have their own teaching to counter that, or else they can't say no. Because Shmuah, the oral tradition, was so important. You couldn't just say, "I've never heard of that. Get out of here." You had to say, "I've heard the opposite of that," and present a counter case. Make sense? Right? But in the final analysis, if the high court says no, if they don't like that, then they set it down. So if he then, after all of this, he's got the verdict that what he's teaching is wrong, that it is not halakha, if he returned to his town and he taught again as he did before, he is not liable. What do you mean he's not liable? Okay, we got to get A and B to understand, or actually just A. But if he gave a practical decision, he is guilty. For it is says, should a man act presumptuously, he is only liable for a practical ruling. So imagine I'm Rabbi Smith, and I have this halakha that says this kind of special animal condition is okay. It's perfectly fine. It's kosher. And we go all the way to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem they say, no, we have a very clear teaching that that special condition is not kosher. I go back to my town, and someone comes to me and says, Rabbi Smith, can you teach me what's kosher and what's not kosher? And I say, of course I can teach you what's kosher and not kosher. This animal is kosher, but don't eat it. Because the high court in Jerusalem said, don't eat it. That's okay. He is still passing on the tradition of what he learned. He is still preserving how he was taught, but he is also acknowledging that the high court sets the rules. And that means he's not following his ruling. He's teaching it only. And you'll notice the whole Mishnah is full of rulings that are minority opinions that were thrown out. But we still teach them. That's not presumptuously. But if you act on it, if you act on a teaching that was ruled out, now we're in trouble. So if I say this animal is kosher, here, have a bite, now we're in trouble. Make sense?
It looks to me like it's like trying to teach you, basically, by trial and error.
a lot of it, yes. And that idea of, okay, we need a competing tradition to sort this out. And we can't say to him, you never learned that. And we don't want to stomp on the tradition that he learned. We want to preserve it because maybe someday somebody will understand it better. And then we'll see why he knew that or why he thought that. And it'll make sense in a different context, right? We can reconcile the different teachings of earlier sages. That's a lot of what the Talmud does, is it spends time reconciling between the Mishnah and other teachings, what are called Braitot. So we're not going to just tell him, never say that again. Keep it, but don't do it. And that's why we get this really interesting part B. But if a disciple gave a practical decision, right? This is the Mr. Smith's student, or Rabbi Smith's student, says, yeah, eat this, it's okay. He is exempt, right? Even though he gave a practical piece of advice, he's exempt. Why? Because this is his stringency. His stringency is his leniency, which is a real poetic phrase of saying, because he is prohibited from giving practical rulings while his master is there, anything he says is nothing, right? Students are not allowed to give rulings while their master is there. So if he gives a ruling, he didn't say anything. It's just noise because he shouldn't be talking. So even though he said exactly the opposite of what he should said and recommended a practical step or a course of action, he shouldn't have been recommending any course of action, right or wrong. So what he said has no legal standing. So we don't have to kill him. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. And that's where we'll leave it for this week. We'll finish off next week for sure.